The U.S. automotive industry faces a severe crisis today, not merely a temporary slowdown or market correction, but a fundamental challenge that threatens American manufacturing capabilities, may drive vehicle prices to unprecedented heights, and could result in thousands of job losses across the sector. At the heart of this crisis lies China's latest strategic move in the ongoing trade war, effectively banning crucial U.S. automotive exports. China, representing the world's largest automobile market, has taken decisive steps to exclude American automakers from its economy. This development extends beyond simple tariff disputes. It signals a strategic pivot that might permanently block U.S. companies from accessing the Chinese market, while simultaneously accelerating the rise of domestic Chinese automotive giants like BYD and NIO. The implications for established American manufacturers such as Ford, General Motors, and Tesla are profound, and the consequences for average consumers may be equally significant. When President Donald Trump initiated his trade confrontation with China in 2018, his stated objectives appeared straightforward: strengthen America's economic position, repatriate manufacturing jobs, and reduce dependency on Chinese supply chains. However, China's response has been anything but passive. Rather than yielding to American pressure, Beijing has systematically countered with its own tariffs, strategic supply chain reconfigurations, and now, what amounts to a comprehensive blockade against key American automotive exports. The statistics reveal a troubling trajectory. Prior to the trade hostilities, U.S. automotive companies sold approximately 275,000 vehicles annually in the Chinese market. Following China's initial retaliatory tariffs, this figure plummeted by nearly 50%. With China's latest countermeasures, American manufacturers could find themselves permanently excluded from the world's largest automotive marketplace. This isn't merely retaliation. It represents a fundamental restructuring of the global automotive landscape, potentially leaving American producers marginalized. For much of the 20th century, the United States led the global automotive industry. Ford, General Motors, and Chrysler defined the world's relationship with automobiles. However, China has methodically constructed its own automotive empire, and now the competitive dynamics appear to be reversed. In 2023, China surpassed Japan to become the world's largest automobile exporter. Even more telling, Chinese manufacturer BYD overtook Tesla in the fourth quarter of 2023 as the global leader in electric vehicle sales. With these new tariffs targeting American manufacturers, China is solidifying its dominance and reshaping global trade patterns in the process. As U.S. brands lose market share in China, Chinese automotive companies are aggressively expanding their influence across Europe, Latin America, and even making inroads into the American market itself. The situation facing traditional American automotive centers like Detroit is particularly challenging. China represents the single largest automotive market globally, accounting for over 30% of worldwide vehicle sales. However, with escalating tariffs and supply chain restrictions, American brands find themselves increasingly marginalized. Ford's market presence in China continues to contract. General Motors has experienced declining sales in China annually since 2018. Tesla confronts mounting regulatory obstacles from Beijing. Meanwhile, Chinese automotive brands are thriving not only domestically but increasingly on the international stage. The implications are clear. American automakers face a protracted uphill battle, and without access to the Chinese market, they may never reclaim their former position of industry leadership. This raises a fundamental question about the trade war's strategic foundations. President Trump's trade policies weren't implemented randomly. They aimed to revitalize American manufacturing, weaken China's grip on essential industries, and protect American jobs. But did this approach ultimately backfire? The evidence suggests some unintended consequences. Rather than weakening China's position, the trade war appears to have accelerated its ascendancy in electric vehicle production and battery technology. Instead of returning jobs to American shores, it has increased costs for domestic manufacturers. And rather than containing China's global influence, it has seemingly motivated Beijing to intensify its international expansion efforts. Was this outcome the result of strategic miscalculation, or does it represent a calculated gambit that anticipated short-term difficulties in exchange for long-term advantages? The answer remains unclear, but one certainty exists. American consumers are feeling the impact. Steel constitutes the fundamental building material for virtually every vehicle on the road. When tariffs affect steel prices, the cost increases don't remain isolated to factories. They cascade through the supply chain to dealerships and ultimately to consumers. With the latest tariffs on Chinese steel and aluminum, American automakers confront higher production costs at a time when supply chains already face significant strain. This extends beyond raw materials. Components ranging from chassis frames to engine parts will experience price increases, forcing manufacturers to either absorb these costs or transfer them to buyers. Historical precedent illustrates the likely outcome. In 2018, similar tariffs drove domestic steel prices up approximately 25%, compelling automotive manufacturers to implement price increases across their product lines. For consumers, this translates to higher vehicle purchase prices and more expensive monthly payments, as material cost increases coincide with already elevated interest rates on automotive loans. The average new vehicle price in the United States approaches record levels, nearing $48,000. With automakers now paying premium prices for steel, this figure could continue its upward trajectory. Even the used vehicle market isn't immune. With reduced new vehicle production, demand for pre-owned vehicles has surged, driving prices higher across all segments. This isn't simply inflation at work. It represents a structural shift in pricing dynamics, where each additional tariff establishes a higher cost baseline for the industry, potentially making affordable vehicles increasingly inaccessible for millions of Americans. With supply chains under pressure and tariffs accumulating, average American car buyers face a harsh reality. Vehicles are becoming even more expensive. Industry analysts warn that with higher steel costs, increasing labor expenses, and persistent supply chain constraints, the average new vehicle price could exceed $55,000 by 2025. Financing options offer little relief. Auto loan interest rates have reached their highest point in 15 years, making affordability an increasing concern, particularly for working-class Americans. The traditional dream of car ownership appears increasingly unattainable for many. Leasing previously offered an alternative path to vehicle access, but with production limitations reducing available inventory, even the used vehicle market faces supply constraints. Meanwhile, foreign automakers, particularly Chinese electric vehicle manufacturers, are introducing less expensive alternatives, creating additional uncertainty for American producers. The American automotive industry represents more than just corporate entities. It encompasses an entire ecosystem of jobs, factories, and communities built around manufacturing centers in states like Michigan, Ohio, and Kentucky. As production costs increase and exports to China diminish, the outlook for this ecosystem grows increasingly concerning. Ford and General Motors have already begun reducing investment in domestic production facilities, while Stellantis has cautioned that extended trade restrictions could necessitate plant closures. When an automotive plant ceases operations, the impact extends far beyond factory workers. It reverberates through steel mills, parts suppliers, and logistics networks. With China rapidly developing its domestic automotive sector and aggressively exporting to Europe, American manufacturers face pressure from multiple directions, losing international market access while confronting escalating domestic production costs. Without government intervention through subsidies or policy adjustments, Detroit and similar manufacturing centers could experience severe contractions. While American automakers struggle with tariff implications, Chinese companies are expanding at an unprecedented pace. Manufacturers like BYD, NIO, and XPeng aren't merely producing vehicles. They're developing self-sufficient, vertically integrated supply chains spanning from battery production to final vehicle assembly. BYD recently surpassed Tesla as the world's largest electric vehicle manufacturer, and its cost reduction strategies make American brands appear increasingly uncompetitive. While General Motors and Ford struggle to control production expenses, BYD continues reducing prices on its latest models, with some electric vehicles selling for as little as $11,000 in China. This represents more than a competitive shift. It constitutes a fundamental industry realignment where Chinese brands outmaneuver American manufacturers not only in China, but increasingly in Latin America, Southeast Asia, and parts of Europe. The longer the United States remains dependent on China for battery production, the more challenging it becomes to counter this growing dominance. The statistics paint a stark picture. China controls over 70% of global electric vehicle battery production and dominates critical lithium refining operations. By contrast, the United States lags in nearly every relevant metric, with domestic battery manufacturing still in early development stages. Even with government incentives provided through the Inflation Reduction Act, scaling up to compete with China's supply chain expertise will likely require at least a decade of sustained effort. Companies like Tesla and General Motors are attempting to secure alternative supply channels, but China's control over rare earth materials and battery technology continues to strengthen. Beijing's aggressive policies supporting electric vehicle infrastructure, consumer subsidies, and export dominance are widening the competitive gap between the nations. Without dramatic government intervention to subsidize battery manufacturing and domestic mineral extraction, American automakers may never recover their competitive position in the electric vehicle market. Tariffs represent just one weapon in China's economic arsenal. Beijing possesses multiple levers of economic pressure, and if tensions escalate further, it could implement even more drastic measures. One significant possibility involves restricting exports of rare earth minerals, which are essential for producing electric motors and batteries. China has previously hinted at such actions, employing a similar strategy against Japan in 2010 that caused prices to spike dramatically. If China weaponizes its control over these critical materials, American automakers could face serious challenges securing alternatives, potentially adding billions in costs and further driving electric vehicle prices higher. Another potential strategy involves flooding the global market with inexpensive Chinese electric vehicles, effectively making it impossible for American companies to compete on price. The implications are clear. If Washington continues its current approach to economic confrontation, Beijing retains significant countermeasures, and the American automotive industry may be unprepared for the consequences. The stakes extend beyond the automotive sector. This situation potentially threatens American manufacturing as a whole. Automobiles represent one of the few remaining major industries where the United States maintains global influence. If China continues expanding its dominance in electric vehicles, batteries, and exports, the repercussions will extend far beyond Detroit. Supply chain disruptions, increasing production costs, and losing China as a major export market could accelerate factory closures across multiple sectors, from steel to semiconductors. With China actively pursuing trade agreements with Europe, South America, and the Middle East, the United States risks losing leverage in global supply networks. Without strategic industrial policies from government policymakers, the American automotive industry could face its most existential threat in generations. And in this new competitive landscape, traditional rules no longer apply. If Washington chooses to intensify its approach, China will likely match each move with equally forceful countermeasures. Increased tariffs won't merely affect China, they'll drive up costs for American consumers and place additional pressure on already struggling domestic automakers. The biggest losers in this scenario would be American workers and consumers, who would experience fewer employment opportunities, higher prices, and diminishing U.S. market influence. The winners would be Chinese automotive companies, expanding globally while American brands retreat. If this economic confrontation continues to escalate, it won't simply determine trade relationships. It will decide who controls the future of transportation itself. The American automotive industry stands at a critical juncture. If this trade conflict continues its current trajectory, we could witness a permanent realignment of the global automotive landscape. The crucial question remains: does Washington possess an effective counter-strategy, or are we witnessing the beginning of the end for America's automotive dominance?